running an agency doesn't have to feel like juggling flaming chainsaws. At Schmidt Consulting Group, we help you ditch the chaos, land more clients, and even enjoy running your business again. No fluff, no BS, just strategies that actually work. Check us out at schmidtconsulting.group because your agency deserves better.
Unlock the secrets of authentic leadership. Join executive coach Seth Rigoletti as he shares powerful stories and game-changing communication strategies you won't want to miss. This episode will transform the way you lead and connect.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Schmidtless. I'm your host, Kurt Schmidt. Welcome back to another episode. I am super excited for today's conversation. We're going to be learning a lot, so I don't want to waste any time. I want to jump in and talk with our new friend, Seth. Let's go over and meet him. Seth, how are you doing today?
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. So, Seth, tell me and the audience about the work you do and who do you work with these days?
Yeah, so I always struggle with actually talking about the way people will understand. So I do executive communication, coaching, leadership, strategy work, but mostly it's just around clarity and authenticity and the ability to coordinate and collaborate effectively. So I work with executive teams, high-level technical teams across all kinds of industries. Some health systems, I work with some startups, some big Fortune 500 companies, and some smaller like breweries and things like that. But the main thing that connects all of them is that they're leaders who are trying to effectively make change within either their organization or their industry in a way that is not obvious. They're trying to either bring details or data or a kind of technological advancement that is just difficult to convince people of these things. So it's like, how do they do it? How do they connect to each other? How do they coordinate with each other? I work in that spectrum.
Yeah, it sounds like a very exciting job. I feel that my entire career has been centered around improving and getting better at communicating as a leader. And I found that there isn't any real problems. They're all communication problems. You try to make a change, you try to update something, you try to improve something, and all of it hinges on how well things are communicated, on whether or not that's going to be successful. And it seems like, in business school or in these other situations, we're taught a lot about how to handle the nuts and bolts of things, like how to build a business model canvas and how to, the hierarchy of needs and all these things. But there really isn't as much focus on improving communication out there. And I think that's where the opportunity is. It was for me as a leader, and I could see why a lot of folks need this sort of help. And, when people come to you, Seth, are they like, people are just not getting me, or people are not, because sorry for the rant, but I always run into people who suffer from bad roommate syndrome, which is, if people listening don't know what that is somebody who says like, I've never had a good roommate, right? And if you meet a leader who says, well, I've never had a really good CTO, it's like, well, is that the CTO's problem or is that your problem? So anyways, that's a big, long thing. I just want to get your reaction to my rant there for a second.
It's such a good point. So the clients I work with most effectively are the ones who are coming to me because there's something that's not flowing the way they want to. Like either they're not able to motivate and inspire teams, or they're having a hard time in the case like, convincing their CTO or influencing their CEO. And those are the ones where I find that there's oftentimes the most gold for us to work on. I do not work and try not to work with people who are just arrogant and stubborn and
they just want
they don't
everything
actually
done
want to
their
change.
way.
They just want everyone else. Yeah, those are not the people I work with or try not to work with. There's a thing about communication, and I'm just going to draw a distinction, Kurt, because I think you were touching on this. Communication is more like an art form. So there are these very tactical things that you learn in marketing and in communication classes, which is really about how to effectively get a message across in words and in advertising or, in sort of a messaging kind of, think about political campaigns. And that's really important. But I work more on this, what we used to call the soft skill area of communication, which is also about your presence, also about just who are you being? How are you listening? What's your tone? I have an acting background, so I look at this really holistic. Well, what you say is so much less important than who you are when you're saying it. And by that, I don't mean, we're never fixed people. Oftentimes, depending upon the context and the situation, we will present very differently. Sometimes we're very in charge. Sometimes we're very soft. And what I notice is leaders and managers is that they get scared. They get insecure. They think they have to be a tough guy, or they think they have to know the answer, communicate in a way that makes it very hard for people to hear them or respond in a positive way.
Yeah. I've dealt with it with women and with men, right? Because men think a lot of times that they have to be tough because that's how they're going to get their way, right? And women sometimes will worry because they don't want people to think they're a B, right? And so they don't want to come across as too forceful. These things that we're taught, these are societal things, not reality sometimes in the situation, right? Because what I've found as a leader is that people do want the truth, and they do want it straight, and they do want to know where they could be doing better and what that means for them, right? And that's the key word there, is what does it mean for them versus what does it mean to you? Because what I learned early on as a leader was if I went to people and said, we need to do this change so I feel like we're doing a good job, people weren't as interested in that change. But if I could find a way to make it so that this change that I was looking for was also a benefit to them, it actually was a change that would stick more often. And so talk to me, Seth, about how, because change is obviously a big subject of what we're talking about around the idea of communication. What are some of the best ways to present change to an employee, a team, a peer, things like that? What are ways that you've seen work and what are ways that don't work?
Well, actually, Kurt, if it's okay, I'm going to tell a story about this because there's actually a lot of nuances here. So I like to go back to the 1800s industrial revolution, this huge technological wave that was happening from like 1840 to 1900, just amazing changes. In medicine, we were improving dramatically and learning a ton. Surgery was becoming an actual thing that we could start to rely on. We had some anesthesia that started to develop. And so people were doing surgeries, but everybody was dying. Like people was, they cut them open and they die of sepsis and nobody knew what was happening. And in 1846, this doctor, this young clinician at these two maternity wards in Vienna, his name is Ignaz Semmelweis. Ignaz Semmelweis was Hungarian. And he noticed that all these mothers were dying of what was called fever, which is just like child death. So they give birth and they would die. And what he was noticing was that the surgeons were going from birth to birth covered in blood. And he said, something's happening here. So he actually ran a scientific clinical trial. One hospital, he just left things alone. In the other hospital, he had doctors, all the students and stuff, wash their hands with lye. And what he noticed was a dramatic, like a 30% change in infant deaths and mother deaths between the two hospitals, a dramatic change. And he published these changes and he talked about it at a conference. All of you doctors killing your patients with your dirty hands. And what is fascinating about this is that he had scientific proof. It was undeniable that something had happened there, but he pissed off everybody so dramatically. And he continued to tell everybody that they were terrible people. They were terrible doctors, that they were killing their patients, that he became more and more pushed to the outside, that by 1866, they had him committed to an insane institution and he died in the insane asylum. My question was always like, why? Why didn't people listen to him? What does it take to actually change? Everyone thinks that logic and facts what change people's minds. What happened here? And they actually call it the Semmelweis effect, which is like the inability to take in new information that disagrees with your core beliefs or what you already know. What's interesting is that at the same time this was happening, a young English surgeon in Scotland named Joseph Lister was making some of the same discoveries. He was learning as he went along that there was something happening in the blood, something happening in these infections that was passing from person to person. And he did all this research. He actually started using a microscope when Louis Pasteur came up with the germ theory. He started to actually see this bacteria.
Yeah.
Still, nobody was convinced. Everybody thought this was this concept of what made people sick was just the air. And just because he was a Quaker, because he was incredibly authentic, because he only spoke about what he knew about, because he was so incredibly likable as a human being, not a people pleaser, but likable. Because he was that, he was able to single-handedly transform an entire medical industry. He came to the United States in 1876 and convinced the United States wanted to throw him out, and he went on a tour. And by the end of the year, everybody was believing in this germ theory and in their hands. And so why was Joseph Lister successful and not Semmelweis not? And if we could tap into that, if we could sort of recognize, who am I being when I'm presenting information that's different than people typically think of the world, what do I do? And you know what we typically do, Kurt? Like, we've been through this with the pandemic. What we do when we present information that's different than what other people think is we tell them have to be an idiot not to think this. We tell them that they're evil. We tell them that they're bad people. We tell them that they're stupid. And this never works. In the history of communication, the history of leadership, I don't think this has ever worked once. So I'm trying to help leaders figure out, who are you being? Are you being authentic? Are you being open? Are you listening to the other person? Are you curious about them? Do you actually know what you are talking about? Can you talk about it in a way that someone else might be able to understand? And can you stay open and non-judgmental in the whole process? Like, you're not going to read a book and be able to do that. So that's what I work with people on. That's my goal, to help people who actually know how to do, who want to change the world for the better, learn how to do this.
No, that's perfect, because I love that story. Thank you for sharing that, because it's so true. I mean, we see it in politics today, or people pointing fingers at other people and wondering why there's no change happening. Let me ask you, to me, what I feel like is the elephant in the room here, because I've dealt with this with other leaders in the past, and I want to get your take on it. What do you say to people who say, well, but I don't want to be fake. I don't want to show up as not me and have to, people will say like words like candy coat my message, or I don't want to have to change. What's your response to people that have that sort of mindset?
Oh, yeah. I used to hear that a lot more than I do now, but I used to be a communication coach in pharma, helping pharmaceutical companies prepare for FDA hearings. And in an advisory committee hearing, there's an independent panel of scientists and experts that you're supposed to present your data to. They have like 90 minutes to hear your data, ask a couple of questions, and then vote. All the scientists, I would try to help them simplify the message, like get to the heart of the thing, like distill what you're trying to say. And they would say that, Kurt, they would be like, I don't want to dumb down my message. These are scientists. I'm not going to dumb down my message. And I'd be like, it's not dumbing down your message so that people can hear it. You could be the smartest person in the room, but if nobody understands you, what difference does it make? You know the answer, but if nobody understands you, if no one's listening, if people are turned off, what difference does it make? What I try to tell people is it's not about changing who you are. It's not about bending yourself so that you appease or accommodate other people. It's about meeting people where they are. And I'll give you an analogy. A Major League Baseball pitcher who throws 98 miles an hour, if that person went to go play catch with an 8-year-old, they're not going to haul off and throw at 98 miles an hour for the 8-year-old. They're going to meet the 8-year-old exactly where the 8-year-old is, and then see how good is this kid and how hard can this kid throw and how much can this kid take. But you're not going to start with the like, well, I'm a Major League professional pitcher, so I'm going to throw it at you at 98 miles an hour. You better just catch it. That's just dumb. Why don't we think about communication like we do about playing catch, where we're not trying to win, we're not trying to like show anybody like how smart we are, or we're not putting all the onus on them to catch whatever we throw. But basically, like, the goal is we win when we play catch. catch. We win when you catch what I throw.
Right. But again, like I see a conflict there too, to some people that I've worked with in the past is that, well, but you said it yourself, these farmers, they're like, these are scientists. They're not 3-year-olds I'm pitching. So why am I having to slow down these are other professionals. Why do I have to slow down? I've seen this in engineers more so than any other group, right? Where they're like, well, if they're too dumb to understand my message, then maybe I shouldn't be talking to them anyway. And so it's just like this narcissistic thing inside of us that comes out.
Yeah. Well, there's an element here, Kurt, where reality kind of takes care of all of this stuff. There's a bit of a, I'm not a big social Darwinian, but there's a Darwinian aspect to this where, yeah, go ahead, give that a try. And I'm like, yeah, they're scientists, but they're not steeped in this research like you are. And you're saying things that they're going to miss. And are you willing to take that risk? And then when they get a no vote and they go, how could they not have caught this? And I'm like, because you didn't tell them. You didn't tell them in a way they could hear it. I've learned that you can't convince anybody of anything. Well, the magic of Joseph Lister, the magic of like people who are good at this, is that they are just patient and persistent and clear, open and authentic. And they just keep going with the message and they stay in the message. And what you said, which is keep that message within context that everybody cares about. So not just how does this make my life better, but how does it make our lives better? This is going to make all of our lives easy. And if you can stay in that message, you don't have to convince anybody of anything. Just let them run off the cliff.
Yeah, because I've seen in leadership positions that felt they had to be, and not because they wanted to be. Because again, especially in corporate America, a lot of ways to move up the chain is to manage people. Sometimes it's the only way to make more money, to get more responsibility, to get more power and influence in the business, to make the kind of impact and change that you want to make as a person. There's a lot of times in organizations, they only allow that to happen is if you take on a team of other individuals. And so they kind of thrust you into well, if you're so good, then you can obviously make other people good, right? Is that a common thing that you've seen in some of the coaching you're doing where people are just put in the wrong situation? I've seen these leaders where they're not interested in personal growth. They're not reading books. They're not listening to podcasts. They're not doing blogs. They're not going out and getting coaches, right? They just kind of are scorched earth types of individuals. And I feel like sometimes it's because a lot in corporate America, we're taught by the things that are happening around us. So if the company is set up this way, then this must be the right way to do this, because they wouldn't do it unless if it was the wrong way to do it.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. So let me see if I can. I would start with, first of all, you're describing the phenomena of corporate culture and the achievement, sort of this, I don't know, you call it like a capitalistic, like to do more, have to get more, have to take on more. And there's a quality to that kind of tackle because that's bigger. There's an element in there that's really interesting, which is that people get promoted. This is what I find really interesting about what you're saying, is that people get promoted because they're good at doing. And then they get put in positions, whether they want or not, they get put in positions, but then they have to manage people by not doing. They have to do less and help others do more. And those people tend to struggle because it's like Ted Williams not understanding why his team batted .225. Like he just can't, like, why can't you just hit the ball? And that's what happens to a lot of these doers, these engineers especially. They get to that level and they're just like, I don't know, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to code all night. I'm just going to fix it. And then they create this passive team that is scared and doesn't know what they're doing. And then they're fired and replaced. And that's the part that heart breaks for everybody because no one's happy in the situation.
Right.
What I try to tell people is the shift from being a doer to a manager is you have to actually be interested in what does it take to be successful in this role, in this job? Like, what does success look like? And if success looks like everyone thinks you're the only one who can accomplish the task, then congratulations, you're going to probably achieve that goal and you're not going to ever be promoted because you're going to be a risk factor for the organization. If you can get curious about What's happening with my team? Where are they stuck? How do I make their job harder? And in what ways do I do things that make their job easier? And in what ways are they confused about what we're actually doing here and why? And every time you ask that question, you can learn little ways to kind of help them grow. And the goal here is you do a little thing that's hard at first with them, where you're letting them learn, teaching them what matters, giving them clear expectations, giving them direct feedback, honest feedback, not judging them, being interested in the growth. And over time, they become better and better and better. And then the whole becomes much, much more effective than the single.
Yeah. No, I think it's important because it makes me think of the changes we've had since COVID and how a lot of us are virtual, like we are right now, and how that communication has changed from being in the office or being around people. And we've seen the dismantlement of the third place in society over the years, your home and your work. And then there's always been like a third place, right? Like a club, a church, different things. And those things are kind of disappearing in society as much because of social media taking over. And so in terms of communication, you've been doing this a while. What are some effective techniques that you've seen work today for people that are dealing with this more remote culture? Because again, like I've said this over and over again, if you spend all day on Slack and on email and you're not talking to people and you're not communicating, at least over video, you're probably not communicating very well. And I just want to get your take, Seth, on what are some best practices from the change that you've seen over the last few years?
Yeah, that's a great question. The challenge of this question is that we tend to talk about distributed work and in-office work as though these were radically different things. I don't think they are. I think that they're just work. The difference is that people can shut their computer and go do their laundry, whereas when they're at work, they get conversations in the hallway, in the bathroom, everywhere. And I think the laziness of leaders is that they're like, I want everyone back in the office because I don't really know what I'm doing. I don't really know how to manage it. I don't really know how to connect with people. So it just worked for me when I could walk around and be like, hey, Bob, how was your weekend? And that somehow worked for me and I want that again. But the problem is that we're not going back to that. That's kind of gone because we've lost some of the social skills that we used to have for all kinds of reasons. Some of it was just generational, some of it's the digital age, and some of it's just like that third place thing. We just lost these places where we used to just connect. The piece that I've noticed that is most important for online managers and in-person managers is take the time to connect with your team. Take the time to let your team connect with each other. We just jump right into, okay, where are we with this project? And we assume that everyone is somehow going to regulate into the group, integrate, and just get on board. And what they are just surprised by is all the passive resistance or sometimes straight resistance they get from people on, doing the simple tasks, or like they fight them on like something that's strategic. That's really, why are you fighting me on this? And I think it really has to do with the fact that if you don't spend the time letting people get to know each other, if you don't spend like 5 minutes at the beginning of a meeting, just letting people check in. And really, I know people hate it, but like making sure that they actually have something to say, even if all they say is, pass, their voice was heard, they were present for that conversation. Then when someone speaks up, when someone actually brings a problem, you get excited, not upset. You don't think, oh, this is a waste of time. When someone brings up a problem or a question, you're like, you reward them for that. When someone is willing to talk about conflict, you reward them for that. You tell them, this is great. This is exactly what we need to do. And yeah, we're not going to be able to accomplish our goal today in this meeting, but this is so great because now we understand each other better. Now we understand what was getting in the way the whole time, right? And it's always some assumption about this other person, some assumption about a behavior, about a character, about an intention, which I'm going to say like 90% of the time has nothing to do with what's actually happened. It's just moving up in our heads because we're all crazy. We're all bringing it all back, right? And like, if you could just surface all that and start to build a culture of trust, you're going to do much better.
And that's the key word, trust, is that, I feel like we're in a trust recession in this country, to be honest, and across the world probably, is that because people have lost some of those ability to emote empathy and other things with folks easily, that trust is sort of, you have to be more intentional about building trust than ever before. And I think that's where some leaders have an opportunity there to focus on, are they showing up as a trustworthy source? I made a funny post on LinkedIn a while ago about how to let your team know they're about to get fired. And that's Slack them, hey, what are you working on? Or, hey, do you have 5 minutes? Hey, can you meet later? Those little Slacks are great ways of showing people. But again, people laugh, but it's true, because if I don't trust you and you Slack me and say, hey, do you have 5 minutes? That fight or flight instinct pops up very quickly, right?
Right. What's interesting about that example, and that's a great example, Kurt, because what's interesting about it is I could totally see how that manager or that executive thinks, but I'm a good person. If the only time you ever reach out to this person is when there's something wrong, if you only reach out to this person when there's a crisis or you're trying to like control them in some way, then yeah, they're going to be really defensive when you say, hey, you got a minute. But if you can just normalize the connection, normalize you talking to people, get people comfortable where they start to have some psychological safety within the organization, where they know that every conversation with you isn't going to turn into a critique. If you can do that, then what happens is when you do give them some feedback, when you do actually have a hard conversation, they're going to be more open to it because they'll have more trust.
Yeah. And I've seen the flip side of this too, because I've had people on the team where they were a bit Chicken Little. And because what they found was that one of the best ways to get attention is to bring problems. And that they would bring problems. And what I realized over time, they were trying to get attention to show that they were problem solvers, how they were paying attention to things. But what it was coming across to me as is that they were kind of this negative influence in the team. And so our wires got crossed very quickly, because I was like, well, why is this person always so negative? Why am I not getting up more opportunities? Why am I not being seen more? Why is my value not being expressed more? And it took me a long time to figure out how to work with that person. I had to be very intentional. I had to be very introspective. I had to really understand, like, was I creating this atmosphere, or were they creating this atmosphere and I was reacting to it and throwing fuel on the fire? So sorry, I don't really have a question there, Seth. It's just what you said really sparked that situation for me.
No, that's such a great example, because so we bring our strategies from our childhood into work. Like, that's just what we do. Like, and so if I am somebody who was a worrier at home, I'm going to bring that worrying strategy to work. And sometimes it's actually very helpful. Like, sometimes it's like, oh, shouldn't we invite Tony to this meeting? I mean, I think Tony should be at this meeting. And that's like my wording sort of, and you might go, hey, that's a good idea. Yeah, we should definitely invite Tony. Thanks for bringing that up. And then I get like positive affirmation. And then I'm going to throw my worry on everything. And then what happens is that I am unaware. This is actually if you want to know the secret sauce of the work that I do, it is just brings some compassionate self-awareness to all the ways that we automatically and compulsively behave in work and in our relationships. If you can notice if I notice that I tend to bring problem, hey, it's not going to work, like, hey, what if it doesn't work? I keep saying, what if it doesn't work? What if so-and-so is mad? What if I'm always doing that, I'm going to be like, oh, I make everyone's job harder. I need that feedback. And Kurt, if you have a relationship with me and you manage me and you're able to say to me something like, hey, Seth, I noticed that in meetings, whenever we present something new, you oftentimes will say something like, what if it doesn't work? And I'll be like, do I do that? And you'll be like, yeah, it happens often. I'll give you an example, and then give me an example. And I'll be like, well, yeah, that might not work because of X, Y, and Z. And then you say, yeah, we know that, but here's what happens when you bring it up in that meeting. All forward momentum stops. Is that what you wanted to do? And then I can say, I think I want to do this. I just want us to do it right. And then you say, great. Why don't you write down your concerns? And then we'll have a separate meeting where we can actually talk about those concerns. But when you blurt them out absentmindedly in that meeting, everyone in that meeting walks out there thinking, oh, maybe this is a bad idea. And if that's not what you're intending, stop doing it. And then if I have that self-awareness and I don't beat myself up and I don't get mad about, this is unfair and I'm just being my authentic self. If I don't do all that, I get to be really curious about what actually am I trying to do in that meeting? And I will tell you, Kurt, what we are all trying to do in every meeting is be relevant. We just want to be relevant. We just want to matter. We just want to know that we count. I call it touching the conch, like from Lord of the Flies. Everybody wants to touch the conch.
Well, I want to touch the conch. Honestly, I could give you the conch all day long, Seth. I could talk to you all day, but we should cut it here. I definitely got to have you come back on the show because I have so much questions for you. Speaking of learning from you, if I want to get in touch with you, Seth, or if I want to contact you and learn more about the work you do, where do I go?
Thank you, Kurt, for saying that. I really appreciate you having me on. This has been a lot of fun talking about this stuff. So if you want to reach out to me, you can find me on my website. It is SethRigoletti.com. So SethRigoletti.com. If you Google my name, it'll come up too. And the second thing is my book. The book is called Into the Wolf. It's a book on how to communicate so that you will actually be heard. And there's 7 different case study stories of people in situations where I'm actually coaching them, and you get a real flavor for how I work and what I'm going for, the basic principles of better communication. So Into the Wolf is a great book. You can find that on Amazon if you want to look for it there. And then SethRigoletti.com.
Awesome. Great. Well, anybody listening, there'll be links in the description to all of Seth's information. So make sure you check that out. Seth, thanks again for joining me, and looking forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, Kurt.
All right, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to join me today. I really appreciate it. You have yourself a great rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, we'd love it if you left a review on iTunes or Spotify. It makes a big difference. And be sure to check out schmidtconsulting.group for more ideas and insights. Remember, every big dream starts with a single step. Keep moving forward, stay curious, and don't forget, we're rooting for you. See you next time.